Have you ever found yourself in that strange position where being completely honest with someone actually made things worse? That moment when your genuine expression of feelings or thoughts led not to connection, but to conflict. That uncomfortable realization that perhaps in some situations your truth creates more discord than harmony. It's a profoundly unsettling experience, one that leaves us questioning the very foundations of what we believe about human relationships. We're often told that honesty is the best policy, that authenticity is the path to meaningful connection, that being true to ourselves is the ultimate goal of psychological health. Yet there you are, standing in the aftermath of sincere self-expression, watching the bridges between you and others smolder and crack, feeling more isolated than before you opened your heart. I understand this feeling deeply, this painful contradiction between what should bring us closer together actually pushing us further apart, the ache of watching relationships strain under the weight of your sincerity, the confusion when your genuine self seems to be the very thing that disrupts harmony. It feels like a betrayal of everything you thought you knew about healthy communication, a cosmic joke where the punchline leaves you standing alone. This disconnect from others when you've actually tried to be more connected through honesty creates a special kind of loneliness. But what if I told you that this tension holds within it the seeds of deeper connection? That understanding this paradox through the lens of Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology might not only explain your experience, but transform it? Today, we're going to explore this delicate balance, drawing wisdom from one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. The paradox of authenticity is at the very heart of Carl Rogers' humanistic psychology. Rogers introduced the concept of congruence as one of the three core conditions for therapeutic change and healthy psychological functioning. Congruence, or authenticity, refers to the state of being where our internal experience, our awareness of that experience, and our expression of it are all aligned. In simpler terms, it means being real, being genuine, being truthfully ourselves without pretense or facade. Rogers believed that this state of authenticity was necessary for psychological health and meaningful human connection. The challenge arises when we find that our authentic expression seems to create conflict rather than connection. This apparent contradiction can leave us feeling lost, wondering if Rogers' principles fail in the complexities of real-world relationships. But a deeper understanding of Rogers' work reveals that this tension is not a failure of the theory, but a natural part of the growth process he described. Rogers didn't promise that authenticity would always lead to immediate harmony. Rather, he suggested that true authenticity, when combined with the other core conditions, creates the possibility for more genuine and ultimately more fulfilling relationships, even if the path there includes periods of discomfort and conflict. I want to pause here for a moment and ask you a personal question. When was the last time you felt that being completely honest with someone created distance rather than closeness? I know how challenging it can be to put these profound emotional experiences into words. Sometimes the most significant moments in our relational lives are the hardest to articulate clearly, yet naming these experiences is often the first step in transforming them. If you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Perhaps you might start with, "I felt disconnected when," and share as much or as little as feels right to you. Your experience, even expressed simply and honestly, might be exactly what someone else needs to hear, to feel less alone in their own struggle with authenticity. And now, continuing our exploration of Rogers' approach to authenticity and its complexities, Rogers' concept of the fully functioning person provides a framework for understanding this paradox. The fully functioning person, according to Rogers, is someone who is open to experience, lives existentially, fully in each moment, trusts their organismic valuing process, their innate wisdom, exercises freedom of choice, and is creative. This person isn't perfect or conflict-free, but has developed the capacity to stay authentic even when it's challenging. When we encounter conflict as a result of our authenticity, it may be that we're in the process of becoming more fully functioning, pushing against the boundaries of old patterns or expectations that no longer serve us or those around us. Rogers would suggest that the discomfort we feel isn't a sign that authenticity itself is flawed, but that we're moving through a necessary phase of growth. The peace we lose in the short term might be making way for a deeper, more genuine peace that can only come from relationships based on truth, rather than accommodation or pretense. The concept of the actualizing tendency is central to Rogers' theory. Rogers believed that every organism has an innate drive toward growth, fulfillment, and self-actualization. This natural tendency moves us toward greater complexity, autonomy, and wholeness if the right conditions are present. When we express ourselves authentically and experience conflict as a result, it may be that our actualizing tendency is pushing against constraints in our environment or relationships that are limiting our growth or expression. The discomfort of this process doesn't mean we're doing something wrong. Rather, it may indicate that important growth is occurring, that our authentic self is pushing for the space it needs to flourish. Rogers would suggest that the path to resolution isn't to retreat from authenticity, but to lean into it, while also creating the conditions for others to do the same. The temporary loss of peace may actually be serving the emergence of a more genuine, more life-giving form of relationship. Rogers' emphasis on unconditional positive regard offers another crucial perspective on navigating the tensions that arise from authenticity. Unconditional positive regard refers to a deep acceptance and respect for a person as they are, without judgment or evaluation. It doesn't mean approving of all behaviors, but rather maintaining a fundamental valuing of the person regardless of specific actions or expressions. When our authenticity creates conflict, practicing unconditional positive regard toward ourselves and others becomes especially important. This means continuing to value ourselves even when our authentic expression has created discomfort, and extending that same fundamental respect to others involved in the conflict. Rogers believed that experiencing this kind of acceptance is transformative. It creates the safety necessary for growth and change. So when authenticity leads to tension, responding with unconditional positive regard doesn't mean abandoning our truth, but rather holding it in a larger context of respect and care for all involved. The concept of empathic understanding, the third of Rogers' core conditions, provides yet another essential tool for navigating the challenges of authenticity. Empathic understanding involves entering the private perceptual world of another person, becoming sensitive to the changing felt meanings flowing in the other person, and communicating your sensing of their world. When our authenticity creates conflict, empathic understanding helps us recognize that the other person's reaction isn't simply an obstacle to our self-expression, but a response emerging from their own complex inner landscape. Their resistance or discomfort may come from fear, past hurt, or their own struggle with authenticity. By attempting to understand their perspective, not to agree with it necessarily but to genuinely comprehend it, we create space for dialogue rather than opposition. Rogers would suggest that combining authenticity with empathic understanding allows us to express our truth while remaining connected to the other person's experience, creating the possibility for mutual growth rather than mutual alienation. Rogers' understanding of defensive processes provides insight into why authenticity sometimes creates conflict rather than connection. Rogers observed that when experiences threaten our self-concept, we tend to distort or deny them to maintain consistency in our self-understanding. When someone expresses themselves authentically to us, their truth might challenge aspects of our self-concept that we are not ready to examine. Our defensive response isn't necessarily a rejection of their authenticity, but a protection of our own sense of self. Similarly, when our authentic expression creates conflict, the other person's negative response might reflect their defensive process rather than a fundamental rejection of us or our truth. Understanding this dynamic helps us approach the conflict with more compassion and less personalization. It suggests that the path forward isn't to abandon our authenticity, but to create conditions of safety that allow both parties to gradually lower their defenses. The tension between individual authenticity and social harmony that Rogers explored in his work on person-centered education and group processes is particularly relevant to our discussion. Rogers recognized that there is an inherent challenge in balancing individual self-expression with the needs and expectations of the larger group or community. In his facilitation of encounter groups, he observed that authentic expression often initially increased tension and conflict within the group, but that working through this conflict with empathy and acceptance typically led to deeper, more genuine connection. This pattern suggests that when our personal authenticity creates social discord, it may be revealing underlying tensions or incongruences that were already present, but hidden beneath a surface harmony based on conformity rather than genuine meaning. The challenge lies in maintaining the courage to be authentic while also holding responsibility for how we express that authenticity, finding ways to be true to ourselves while remaining in relationship with others. Rogers' concept of the socialized self versus the real self offers another valuable perspective on the tension between authenticity and peace. The socialized self is the self we develop in response to conditions of worth imposed by others. The good boy or good girl who meets external expectations to receive approval and acceptance. The real self, in contrast, is our authentic core, the self that emerges when we're free from external evaluation and connected to our own organismic valuing process. When our authentic expression creates conflict, it may be that we're challenging the conditions of worth that have shaped the socialized selves of those around us, or perhaps their authentic response is challenging conditions of worth we've internalized. This understanding helps us see the conflict not as a simple interpersonal disagreement, but as part of a larger struggle between socialized patterns and authentic being. The peace we temporarily lose in this process might be the peace of conformity, making way for the deeper harmony of authentic relationship. The distinction between content and process in Rogers' approach to facilitation provides another lens for understanding the tension between authenticity and peace. Rogers was less concerned with the specific content of what was being discussed, and more attentive to the process of how people were relating to each other and to themselves. When authenticity creates conflict, focusing exclusively on the content, the specific point of disagreement often leads to entrenchment and further alienation. Shifting attention to the process, how we're communicating, what fears or needs might be underlying the tension, how we're experiencing each other in the moment, can open new possibilities for connection even amidst disagreement. Rogers would encourage us to be authentic not just about our opinions or perspectives, the content, but also about our experience of the interaction itself, the process. This process-oriented authenticity doesn't guarantee resolution of the content disagreement, but it does maintain connection and understanding even when consensus isn't possible. If this message has resonated with something deep within you, if you've found yourself nodding in recognition or feeling a quiet sense of validation, as we've explored the complex relationship between authenticity and peace through Rogers' humanistic lens, I want you to know that you're not alone on this journey. I'm not here to offer simple solutions or quick fixes to these profound human challenges, but rather to walk alongside you as we explore these depths together. This channel is a space for that kind of exploration, a place where we can engage with the wisdom of thinkers like Carl Rogers not as abstract theory, but as living insight that might illuminate our own experience. Unlike the superficial advice that often floods our feeds, here we're committed to approaching these human dilemmas with the depth and respect they deserve. If that approach speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel as an act of commitment to your own emotional and relational growth. By turning on notifications, you're creating a regular opportunity to pause and reflect on these deeper dimensions of human experience. I'll be here consistently, offering these reflections and holding space for your own insights and questions. In a world that often rushes past the deeper currents of human experience, let's create a community that slows down enough to notice, to feel, to understand. The concept of psychological safety, which emerged from Rogers' work and has been further developed by subsequent researchers, offers another essential perspective on creating conditions where authenticity can flourish without unnecessarily threatening peace. Psychological safety refers to a climate where people feel they can express themselves, take risks, and be vulnerable without fear of punishment or humiliation. When our authentic expression creates conflict, it may indicate that psychological safety is lacking in the relationship or environment. Building greater safety through consistent respect, attentive listening, non-judgment, and appropriate boundaries creates a container that can hold more authenticity without descending into harmful conflict. This doesn't mean avoiding all tension or disagreement, as Rogers recognized that growth often requires some discomfort, but it does mean creating conditions where that discomfort feels manageable rather than overwhelming. By attending to the level of safety in our relationships, we create more possibility for authenticity to lead to connection rather than alienation. even when it initially creates tension. Rogers' understanding of the natural phasing of therapeutic and group processes provides a hopeful framework for navigating periods when authenticity seems to threaten peace. In his observation of encounter groups and therapy relationships, Rogers noted that increased authenticity often initially led to greater tension and conflict, but that if the process continued with sufficient safety and respect, this phase typically gave way to deeper understanding and more genuine connection. This pattern suggests that when our authenticity creates conflict, we may be in a necessary but temporary phase of a larger process of relationship development. Rather than seeing the conflict as a failure or endpoint, Rogers would encourage us to view it as a transition, a sign that the relationship is moving from a superficial harmony based on accommodation to the possibility of a deeper harmony based on genuine understanding and acceptance of differences. The challenge is to stay with this process rather than retreating to superficial peace or accepting permanent alienation. The balance between self-acceptance and growth in Rogers' theory offers another lens for approaching the tension between authenticity and peace. Rogers believed that paradoxically, genuine change becomes possible precisely when we fully accept ourselves as we are. Similarly, relationships can evolve and grow most powerfully when there is first a full acceptance of the current reality of the relationship, including its tensions and limitations. When our authenticity creates conflict, there can be a tendency to immediately focus on resolution or change, either changing ourselves to restore peace, often at the cost of authenticity, or pushing for the other person or the relationship to change to accommodate our truth. Rogers would suggest an alternative approach, first fully acknowledging and accepting the current reality, including the discomfort and conflict, without immediately trying to fix or change it. From this place of acceptance, we can then explore possibilities for evolution that honor both our authenticity and the relationship. The concept of dialogue, which Rogers explored in his later work, offers a framework for authenticity that intrinsically includes relationship rather than potentially threatening it. Dialogue isn't merely conversation, but a specific quality of exchange characterized by mutual authenticity, deep listening, suspension of certainty, and openness to emergence. In true dialogue, authenticity doesn't stand in opposition to connection, but is offered as an invitation to deeper meeting. When our sincerity seems to threaten peace, it may be that we're expressing our truth in a way that doesn't have the qualities of dialogue. Perhaps it's one-sided, demanding of agreement, closed to the other's perspective, or focused more on being heard than on mutual understanding. Rogers would encourage us to cultivate the capacity for dialogue, which doesn't mean diminishing our authenticity, but rather expressing it in a way that simultaneously makes room for the other's authentic response. The peace that emerges from dialogue isn't based on avoidance of difference, but on a mutual commitment to staying in relationship across difference. Rogers' observations about the transformative potential of being fully heard offer hope when authenticity seems to threaten peace. Rogers noted that when people feel genuinely understood, not just their words but the feelings and meanings behind them, they typically become more open, less defensive, and more capable of hearing others. When our authenticity creates conflict, it may be that neither person in the interaction feels fully heard in their experience. Rogers would suggest that creating space for each person to express their perspective and to have that perspective genuinely understood can itself begin to transform the conflict. This doesn't mean agreement, but rather a deeper recognition of each other's humanity and subjective experience. The peace that emerges isn't based on one person sacrificing their authenticity, but on both people feeling sufficiently recognized in their truth that they can more easily make space for difference. In conclusion, Rogers' humanistic psychology offers a nuanced and hopeful perspective on navigating the tension between authenticity and peace. His work suggests that this tension, while painful, is often part of a necessary growth process that can lead to deeper, more genuine connection if approached with courage, compassion, and patience. The peace we temporarily lose when authenticity creates conflict may be making way for a more profound harmony based on truth rather than pretense, on genuine acceptance rather than mere tolerance. This doesn't mean that all conflicts lead to deeper connection or that authenticity guarantees resolution, but it does suggest that the path through these tensions lies in more fully embodying the qualities Rogers identified as growth-promoting: congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding, rather than in retreating from authenticity for the sake of superficial harmony. The journey isn't easy, and it requires a willingness to stay with discomfort and uncertainty, trusting in the natural movement toward growth and connection that Rogers observed throughout his work. But the possibility it opens is profound. Relationships where we can be fully ourselves and deeply connected, where peace doesn't require the sacrifice of truth, and where authenticity serves rather than threatens genuine meeting between people. If this message has resonated with something deep within you, if you found yourself nodding in recognition or feeling a quiet sense of validation as we've explored the complex relationship between authenticity and peace through Rogers' humanistic lens, I want you to know that you're not alone on this journey. I'm not here to offer simple solutions or quick fixes to these profound human challenges, but rather to walk alongside you as we explore these depths together. This channel is a space for that kind of exploration, a place where we can engage with the wisdom of thinkers like Carl Rogers, not as abstract theory, but as living insight that might illuminate our own experience. Unlike the superficial advice that often floods our feeds, here we're committed to approaching these human dilemmas with the depth and respect they deserve, honoring the complexity of your experience, rather than reducing it to platitudes or oversimplifications. If that approach speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel as an act of commitment to your own emotional and relational growth. By turning on notifications, you're creating a regular opportunity to pause and reflect on these deeper dimensions of human experience. I'll be here consistently, offering these reflections and holding space for your own insights and questions. In a world that often rushes past the deeper currents of human experience, let's create a community that slows down enough to notice, to feel, to understand. Join me in this ongoing conversation about what it means to be authentically human in connection with others.